In this lesson, we're going to be talking about a crucial element to adding some realism to your hands, and that is sculpting the veins. And I'm going to give you 10 tips to help you sculpt the veins more convincingly. So let's get into it. Tip number 1 is understanding the anatomy. And so just like we did with the muscles, the bones, and the tendons of the hand, you could go ahead and add on the veins of the hand onto this écorché sculpture. I'm not going to do that because I feel like the veins are a little bit more subtle. They kind of dip in and out of the surface, and so I don't think it's as important to know exactly where the veins come from. A few major veins come up through the hand and then they branch out like a tree as they move out towards the fingers. So that's the main thing that you want to be looking for. As far as the names of the veins, there's the median antebrachial vein that goes up from the inside part of the forearm and then kind of branches out into what's called the superficial palmar veins. There's the basilic vein, which is more on the pinky side. Then on the back side of the hand, there's the accessory cephalic vein and the cephalic vein, which is on the back of the thumb side part of that back of the forearm. And all of these go up into what's called the dorsal venous network of the hand. So anyway, the names are confusing, they're complicated, and they're interesting to learn, but what's really important is recognizing the veins as you're sculpting. The second tip is use a reference. So this is a great tip for any type of sculpting, but with the veins, it's especially helpful to either use yourself as a reference if you're sculpting your own hand, or if you have reference images. It's important to be able to turn the references, so either a 3D model or references that have the hand turning in space, because sometimes, depending on the lighting, the veins look much more stark and that they're raised a lot more from the surface than what they actually are. So being able to see it from the side and see how much the veins are actually raised from the surface, from the side view, that's really helpful. Tip number 3 is start with a smooth surface. And by that, I don't mean a flat surface. I mean that the secondary forms of the muscles and the anatomy that comes before the veins. So with this, we're thinking about things like the fat pads of the hand or like the muscles of the wrist. Some of the tendons I like to lay in ahead of time as well. So all of those should be established, and you should have the surface somewhat smooth before you go ahead and add on these veins. So the veins are kind of the last step when it comes to the secondary forms of the sculpture. So what I like to think about is if you had to leave the sculpture without the veins, it would be pretty much ready to go and it wouldn't feel undone in any areas. That smooth surface or that finished surface allows us to add on the veins on top, and then those veins will travel along with those surface forms and it'll look a lot more natural than if you try to sculpt the veins too early on. Tip number 4 is to sketch out the veins ahead of time. So you can use a knife or a loop tool or whatever you like to use to draw on the surface of your sculpture. Just draw in lines to give an indication of where those veins are going to be placed. Make sure they look good before you actually go and start adding on pieces of clay to represent those veins. These lines will serve as a guide to help prevent mistakes before you start adding on mass. Tip number 5 is to build slowly and gradually with small pieces of clay. So you can roll out long coils of clay and then put those coils in, but after sculpting some veins and after looking at how some other sculptors that I admire treat the veins, I realized that it's a little bit easier to get convincing looking veins by using small coils of clay and just pressing them on the surface. Some of these coils will be smaller, some of them bigger, and with that variation comes in variation of the surface of the vein, and there is a lot of variation with the veins. So some parts of the vein will pop out a lot more, maybe it's going over a tendon or something like that, and so it's raised quite a bit from the surface, and then some places it'll almost disappear entirely, become very smooth, and then it'll pick up again. So those little variations are a little bit easier to indicate by using small pieces of clay and building up gradually. Tip number 6 is to blend the edges smoothly. And so you can use whatever tool you prefer to use to texture the sculpture. I really like this, my favorite tool, which is kind of a little spatula on one end, one side that's more rounded, the other side is a little bit more thin. And then coming across the surface of the vein, so if the vein travels in one direction, let's say the part of the vein that you're sculpting is traveling in this direction, you want to come across or over that vein several times to smooth it out and to blend it into the surface so that it looks like it's underneath the skin and not laying on top. Tip number 7 is to vary the thickness and the depth. So this is something that I've already mentioned, where the veins, there's a lot of variety in how the veins interact with the surface. So really pay attention as you're observing your reference. Think about it, okay, where is the vein lifted the most from the surface? Where does it kind of blend in more? Where is the sharp hills and where is it more of a soft rolling hill? Those are the things that really make a difference when it comes to representing a lifelike realism in your sculpture, even if the texture isn't the exact texture that you'd have on your hand. So here you can see some places where there's a really dramatic kind of lifted form as the vein travels up and over this tendon on the back, and then it kind of smooths out in between the surface forms as it goes into this more muscle area. Tip number 8 is to add details. And so this might mean that after you sculpt the veins, if you're going for a more realistic surface texture, you might take some texture stamps, some silicone texture stamps, and go over the surface of the sculpture and add in those textures over top of the veins that you've sculpted in. Or if you're doing a looser texture, a lightly tooled texture like the kind that I like, you just want to make sure that the texture blends with the rest of the sculpture, that you're not treating the veins differently than how you treat the rest of the forms. Tip number 9 is to change the lighting that you're observing your sculpture. By changing the lighting, you're able to see and understand a little bit better of how the forms are blending in, how the veins are looking in comparison to the other surface forms of the hand. And if there's any issues or anything like that, then you can address it. But sometimes, like if you're sculpting, like this pose in particular, let's say I'm a little bit closer to the light and all of this is in shadow the whole time, then when I finally do look at it with a different lighting source, it might not look as good as I thought it did. So change your perspective, change the lighting. That's tip number 9. Tip 10 is to step back away from your sculpture and make the final touches. That's to just back up away from your sculpture, get a new perspective, point of view, look at it from different angles, and then add in the final touches to make sure that it looks good and you're happy with the finish. Okay, there you have it. 10 tips to help you sculpt realistic veins in clay. These are especially important when it comes to hand sculptures. The hands are some of the places where the veins are the most prominent. Be careful as you're adding veins. If you're going for a look that's more feminine or more young, you want to smooth out those veins if you include them at all. And then as people age, their hands become more vascular, so the veins are protruding more from the surface, more of an indication of those bones of the hand and the knuckles and things like that. So keep those things in mind as you're adding these types of details onto your sculpture. Hopefully you'll find these tips helpful. In the premium course, there will be exclusive lessons, additional guided demos, and much more. So be sure to get the premium course. Stay creative, stay productive. I'll see you in the next lesson.